This is the Geopolitical Update podcast from the CDA Institute, Canada's premier defense and security think tank. The Geopolitical Update is your trusted source for timely analysis of the week's most significant global security and defense-related developments. I'm Josh Malm, and on the afternoon of May 23rd, 2025, these are the main stories from around the world. In Eastern Europe, drone warfare intensified as Ukraine and Russia launched dozens of attacks across each other's territory. Amid these strikes, both countries completed their largest prisoner swap since the invasion began, offering a rare moment of diplomacy in an otherwise grinding conflict. To unpack this week's events, we'll be joined by Keir Giles, Senior Consulting Fellow for the Russia and Eurasia Program at Chatham House. Also in this week's podcast, in Washington, Donald Trump unveiled the Golden Dome initiative this week, a $175 billion space-based missile defense system designed to intercept hypersonic, ballistic, and space-launched threats. He promised that it will be operational by the end of his term. And in the Middle East, Israel's declaration of an expanded ground offensive in Gaza this week has drawn sharp international backlash and deepened fears of a broader humanitarian crisis. As ground maneuvers creep forward and deadly airstrikes intensify, a rare joint statement from Canada, the UK, and France condemned the escalation as wholly disproportionate and threatened sanctions. First, in Eastern Europe, drone attacks intensified as Russia and Ukraine exchanged strikes. They also completed their largest prisoner swap since the war began. After speaking with Putin, Trump said ceasefire negotiations would immediately start between the two sides, but warned he'd step back if talks stall. To unpack this week's events, we'll be joined by Keir Giles, Senior Consulting Fellow for the Russia and Eurasia Program at Chatham House.
This week has seen greater numbers in terms of Ukrainian attacks on Russia, and also, again, impressive depth for how far those attacks can reach and how much disruption they can cause to ordinary Russians, which for a long time, of course, has been a key objective of Ukraine. Bringing home to people within Russia the fact that they are at war, and this is not something that they can ignore and pretend is happening to somebody else. But at the same time, of course, we've known for a long time that the outcome of the war in Ukraine is not necessarily going to be settled on the front line or even by the military achievements of either side. It's the broader geopolitics that is still important. And in that respect, one of the encouraging signs that we've seen is a slackening in U.S. efforts to attempt to impose Russian surrender terms on Ukraine. We've had the abortive attempt at so-called peace talks, which Russia has shown very plainly it has zero interest in pursuing, sending its B team with the same list of demands that it had in March 2022. And this big unanswered question, of course, is how exactly is the United States going to respond to this? When the U.S. says it is prepared to walk away from the process, does that mean in the positive sense of stopping trying to transmit Russia's demands to Ukraine and enforce them on Kyiv? Or does it mean something far more damaging, suspending military aid and intelligence support to Ukraine altogether once again? That is an unknown. But of course, as time goes on, Ukraine is building its resilience and building its means of operating independently from U.S. support to the greatest extent possible, and slowly, gradually, European support for Ukraine is stepping in to replace it. So as time goes on, Ukraine is becoming stronger.
We've seen potentially the United States stepping back from the peace deal. Trump said that after a two-hour phone call with Putin, that the conditions of a peace deal could only be negotiated between Russia and Ukraine. What might this say about U.S. posture towards Ukraine a bit more broadly?
Well, the pattern is very clear. What Trump says on any given day about U.S. prospects for support, or indeed about his own plan for the peace settlement, isn't a guide to what is actually going to happen. It's not even a guide to what he may be saying 24 hours later. This is just the latest occasion on which Trump has flip-flopped between saying that it is only him that can negotiate a peace settlement and saying that it is only Russia and Ukraine. So where exactly the United States stands on this seems to depend on the day of the week. Overall, it's just another indicator that this process is not going to be significant as we thought it would be for determining how exactly Ukraine is forced to come to ceasefire terms. Of course, what it has pushed forward is now Ukraine is far more engaged in the possibility of a ceasefire without preconditions, which previously, of course, was thought to be among the worst case outcomes for Ukraine, because it is that allows Russia to freeze the conflict, to cement its gains, and to take a breather for the next onslaught. So something has changed as a result of Trump's efforts, just nothing like what he was describing at the outset of the process.
This week, we're seeing a prisoner swap between Ukraine and Russia following the attempt at peace talks last week. What impact is this having, if at all, on proceedings and relations between Russia and Ukraine?
Absolutely. This is the one positive outcome of Russia and Ukraine meeting face to face in this format, that it has generated a much larger prisoner swap than we've seen to date. And of course, the more people Ukraine can recover from Russian captivity, where they're subjected to systematic torture, whether they're armed forces personnel or civilians, the better and the faster. And a one-for-one swap, of course, is more encouraging than previous occasions when Ukraine has been forced to trade high-value individuals for disproportionate numbers of their own citizens coming back. So this is positive and this is progress, but of course it is only one tiny sector of all of the issues that need to be resolved between the two countries before you can approach anything that you can even remotely describe as peace. Things have been so unpredictable throughout the course of this war, even before the arrival of Donald Trump with his long screwdriver, that it's really hard to make predictions that far out. The long-term trends appeared clear. There was a consensus emerging among people who were watching the conflict from outside Ukraine as well as within it, that by late 2025, possibly early 26, Russia was going to start to run out of time because they would be exhausting their reserves of manpower, their economy, even their stockpiles of armored vehicles, and it would become increasingly hard to continue to prosecute the war at the intensity that we've seen. But of course, a lot has changed since then. We've seen not only the North Korean support, which may potentially be resumed at some point in the future, but also Russia being thrown the lifeline by the US administration and an opportunity to freeze the conflict and rescue themselves from their own misguided misadventure. It's interesting very much that Putin has not taken this opportunity, which looked like an ideal means to resolve the conflict, or at least freeze the conflict in Russia's favor. Plainly, the calculus within the Kremlin, or at least within Putin's office, is that Russia still has the military advantage, whether or not that seems to be the case from everybody else that's watching the conflict.
Keir, last year you wrote a book, Who Will Defend Europe? And you discuss what the repercussions would be if Europe and the U.S. continue to underestimate the long-term threat of Russia. A few months ago, we saw the release of the Rearm White Paper in Europe. Do you think that Europe and the U.S. are still underestimating the threat posed by Russia?
Well, those are two very different things. The United States' approach to the threat from Russia, of course, is very distinctive after the arrival of Donald Trump. And the decision appears to have been taken that no matter what happens, Russia will not be treated as a threat. One of the papers that I've been writing lately and will be presenting in the United States, hopefully during the course of next month, is about the threat posed by Russia and other hostile actors to U.S. critical infrastructure and nationally important systems, in the same way as the campaign of targeted assassinations and arson and sabotage that we've seen across Europe, under what circumstances that could spread to the United States. And paradoxically, there's a mixed picture on that since January 2025. On the one hand, the United States has removed much of the reason why Russia might undertake something targeting logistics in the US by saying that they are less inclined to oppose Russia's objectives in Europe. On the other hand, they're making it vastly easier for Russia or China or Iran or indeed local lunatics to have a go at systems by dismantling a lot of the federal structures that are designed to protect them. So there's an ongoing evolving picture in terms of United States picture of the Russian threat, which may or may not actually turn into the realization eventually that they have underestimated the hostility from Russia. Meanwhile, even in Europe, it's hard to generalize because you still have that spread across the continent from the easternmost countries that are in no doubt as to where the challenge is, to those in the West that may still think that they're insulated by distance and by having allies and partners between them and Russia. But if you listen to the military intelligence chiefs, the defense chiefs, all of those who are studying the Russian threat at an official level across the continent, there is still this unanimity that Russia is preparing for an attack beyond Ukraine when Moscow thinks the time is right.
In the campaign, I promised the American people that I would build a cutting-edge missile defense shield to protect our homeland from the threat of foreign missile attack. And that's what we're doing. Today, I'm pleased to announce that we have officially selected an architecture for the state-of-the-art system that will deploy next-generation technologies.
Over to Washington, President Trump unveiled the $175 billion Golden Dome missile defense system, aiming to counter advanced threats and be operational before his term ends. Canada is exploring participation as part of NORAD modernization. To unpack the significance of the announcement, we're joined by Thomas Karako, Director of the Missile Defense Project and a Senior Fellow with the Defense and Security Department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
Tom, could you explain what exactly the Golden Dome missile defense system is, maybe provide some historical context, and how it might differ from other existing U.S. and allied missile defense programs like ground-based mid-course defense or Israel's Iron Dome?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I'll say the Golden Dome is really ought to be understood as an initiative and not a system. There's going to be a collection of systems that are currently existing or that will be created, but it's not really going to be a system per se. It's a kind of like SDI was not a system. It was an initiative. And so I think thinking about it as an umbrella package helps to kind of explain and contextualize what's going on. It's a political initiative in that respect, and it's not and a programmatic initiative. And so how we got here is first and foremost because of the threat, because of the strategic and technological environment, and just the very simple, bleedingly obvious fact at this point that missiles have become weapons of choice. Not just the big nuclear ICBM kind of very bad day scenario, but rather a very low threshold for use. And so you see missiles being reached for early and often, and a lower threshold for use in the Middle East, in the Red Sea, in Ukraine, of course, on a almost daily basis. And it's not just the big ICBMs, as I said, it's the garden variety cruise missiles, it's drones, which are essentially cousins and a very critical part of the missile spectrum as such. You know, the Shaheds of today that are being used in Ukraine or being fired at Israel, you know, are basically the V1s of yesteryear. They're the poor man's cruise missile, as it were. And so you see this broad trend to the global diffusion of precision-guided munitions that are plentiful, but also increasingly reliable and just dang useful for targeting various things. So that's how we got here. And so it is the specter of vulnerability, the specter of use against the U.S. homeland in different ways beneath the threshold or the perceived threshold of nuclear reprisal, which is to say, this is why we need a deterrence by denial in addition to deterrence by punishment. So that's basically how we got here in the most basic sense. And then programmatically, there's lots of other threads as well.
Given our bilateral cooperation on initiatives like continental defense, how might you see Canada fitting into such an initiative?
Yeah, look, I would say a very important event here was when Justin Trudeau visited NORAD several years ago, and Canada pledged, I think it was something like 40 billion Canadian over some period of time, maybe 10 years of time, for increased efforts on NORAD and Northern Warning System and things like that. That's going to be critical, and especially the development, especially the fielding of over-the-horizon radars. That's going to be so critical for long-range domain awareness, so you can see things coming, so you can see or at least detect those Russian bombers, loitering in the Arctic. You can see and detect cruise missiles if they were to be coming in from long ways away, as opposed to waiting for a radio frequency radar to pick them up ground-based. So the over-the-horizon radars, the OTHR effort is fundamental. It's critical for the defense of our homelands, plural. And I was very pleased to see that, because that's going to be so important for the combined efforts for just the revitalization of NORAD generally. And so I suspect that effort, which has kind of been on the books for a while now, will hopefully get woven into and revitalized by the Golden Dome initiative and the impetus and the inertia behind the Golden Dome initiative.
Now, I'm thinking Iron Dome, Israel, there's much less geography there to cover. What might be some of the challenges in actually implementing over time, especially by the end of President Trump's term?
Yeah, look, it was said that there would be some operational capability, but in the next 3 years or so. I think there will be some operational capability by the end of the term. But at the same time, it's absolutely the case that there will be future phases and more to come beyond that. So I think there will be sort of a battle management, command and control efforts, perhaps some OTHRs, the procurement of existing systems, things like that. That I think is actually realistic. But for the things that are going to be developed, for the new research and development that has to be done, they're going to, of course, have to phase in over a number of years.
I'm wondering if you might be able to touch a bit more on some of the specific threats, like maybe hypersonic glided vehicles, long-range cruise missiles, or other space launch weapons that the dome would be sort of designed to counter.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's going to be requests for information. There's going to be calls for proposals for getting after, in the first instance, space-based sensors. We need lots of space-based sensors to see hypersonic and other threats. I think, again, there's going to be a lot of merit to increased space generally for the missile defense mission. The space-based interceptor problem a lot has changed technologically since the last time we looked at this. And launch costs being, of course, at the top of the list, having gone down dramatically. But I think there's a number of other technological trends that actually make that more viable than that has been in the past. And that shouldn't be dismissed out of hand. But I think the other big development has actually been, again, back to the strategic and the threat environment, that space is and has become and is now recognized to have become a warfighting domain. And so the space-based interceptor thing, I believe, is going to emerge as a subset of the more plentiful emergence of space fires, space to space, space to ground, space to air kind of capability. So you're going to see a lot of space fires. We now have a space force and space command. And I predict that space-based interceptors will probably be a subset of that.
If Israel continues to deny aid and expand military operations in Gaza, part of what your statement was about, what concrete action will Canada take, and what kind of sanctions will it include?
Well, that will, I very much, the purpose of the statement, the intention of the clear language is not just of ourselves, but of France, of the United Kingdom, many other countries, is that Israel ensures that adequate humanitarian aid gets to the population there.
In the Middle East, Israel's expanded ground offensive in Gaza sparked strong criticism from Canada, the UK, and France, who called it disproportionate and threatened sanctions, warning of worsening humanitarian conditions, and possible breaches of international law. Here to unpack what was said in the statement, the implications of the expansion of the ground offensive, and the wider regional implications of the ongoing war, we're joined by Thomas Juneau, assistant professor at the University of Ottawa's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs.
Now, as our audience will well know, and as you will know, Israel recently expanded its ground operation in Gaza. I believe it's called Operation Gideon's Chariots. What are the general aims here with this ground expansion? And building on this, I've heard other experts say that, including former Secretary of State Antony Blinken, that Hamas cannot be destroyed. So what are the aims here? What is it looking like on the ground, and how do we resolve this or manage the issue? I guess much people at much higher levels than us are trying to grapple with these very issues, right?
So what is the aim is actually a difficult question to answer because at different moments, different people have said different things in Israel in terms of the aim. But if you simplify it, it's possible to say two things in answer to that question. Officially, the aim for Israel, the objective is to destroy Hamas. This is something that several members of the government, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, have consistently said. The goal is to dismantle Hamas militarily and to dismantle its ability to govern Gaza in the future. The second possible aim is of using the operation as a bargaining chip, of using the operation, or at least the threat of an expanded operation, to be a bit more precise, as a way to pressure Hamas to make additional concessions, either more specifically on the release of hostages, of which there are about 60 dead or alive remaining, and broader concessions in that larger negotiation that will happen at some point on the future of Gaza. These are not mutually exclusive, right? There can be the objective of destroying Hamas and keeping the option open of negotiating at some point. That does raise a number of questions, though, including the main criticism that has been made by several people, including inside Israel, by the way, of whether the aim of destroying Hamas is feasible. And to me, and to a wide proportion of experts, it simply is not. And by saying that, it's not judging on the desirability of that outcome. I mean, to me, Hamas is an obstacle to peace, and the world will be a better place and the region will be a better place if or when it is gone. But in practice, is it feasible? The reality is that there is no reason to think that it is.
Dr. Juneau, this past week on Monday, we also saw Canada, along with UK and France, put out a joint statement threatening sanctions against Israel. Can you maybe unpack this for us?
So on Monday evening, Canada, France, and the UK issued a joint statement. And I think it's good that you asked to unpack it briefly, because there's been a fair bit of misperception on that statement. First of all, it is a statement that is balanced. Yes, it does call on Israel to increase humanitarian assistance, to not expand significantly military operations, but it is also a statement that calls on Hamas to release the hostages and makes it clear that Hamas is a terrorist organization that is an obstacle to peace. And this has consistently been the position, and it has not changed. And it's important to repeat that because a number of people have kind of neglected to mention that aspect of the statement. The other question about the statement is it a big shift in Canadian foreign policy? And here there's been a number of commentators, of people who've said, yes, it's a big shift, whether they agree or not with that big shift. And I think it's not. To me, at this point, it's a statement. It's words. And words, to me, are not a shift, especially when you talk about such an entrenched conflict as this one. Some of the words used are a bit heavy. That's true. But Canada has criticized Israel in the past, and so have Paris and London. But as long as there is no implementation of the actions that are threatened in that statement, it is too early to speak of a shift, or at least a significant shift.
Does Canada's articulated position deviate at all from that of the United States? And does it, how does Canada's position impact, if at all, the bilateral relationship?
So one of the interesting aspects of that statement, which was mentioned, and that's not inaccurate, is that it was done by Canada, France, and the UK without the United States, because it is not consistent with the American position at this point, which is much more aligned with Israel. That being said, I would bring two important nuances here. First of all, it has happened in the past before that there have been gaps between the US on the one side and American allies on the other, Canada, France, and the UK, on the issue of Israel. We even saw that under Obama. We saw it under various American presidents. So that on its own, the existence of that gap is not exceptional at all. The other thing I'd say, and this in a way is the most important point in this entire discussion, Canada's position matters to us because we're Canadians. Outside of Canada, it barely matters. And that's not criticism of this or any other government. We're not a big country in this conflict. There have been rumors of American, and clearly, specifically Trump, impatience with Israel and with Netanyahu. It's not clear to what extent, it's not clear how far it's going to go, but there are material indications of that. Trump went to the Middle East 2 weeks ago. He did not go to Israel. Trump is negotiating a nuclear deal with Iran. I don't know if it's going to work out, but we clearly know that Israel opposes these negotiations. Trump reached a ceasefire deal with the Houthis, which basically threw Israel under the bus, right? And did not include Israel. And I could give you a couple other examples, but the point is that Trump's America First approach to foreign policy, which we have criticized so much in Canada, also applies to Israel. And Trump clearly showed that in the last few weeks. What does it mean for the future in terms of Gaza? I don't know. For now, there remains alignment, but you could see growing pressure on the American side on Israel also coming.
Thank you, Dr. Juneau. Now, the conflict has been ongoing almost 2 years now, October 2023. We're now here end of May 2025. What has been the wider geopolitical and regional impact of the ongoing war, and where do we stand right now in the Middle East as of May 23rd, 2025?
Well, that's an easy question to answer in a minute and a half, but I would make a few points on that. First of all, it has to be said, the humanitarian catastrophe for the Palestinian people, that is not only a humanitarian implication, but one with broad political security and geopolitical consequences. That is the direct result, right, of Hamas having made the decision to launch that terrorist attack in October 23. Two, at the geopolitical level, severe weakening of Iran and the so-called axis of resistance, which is the network of non-state actors that Iran arms and supports. That network is vastly weaker today, May 2025, than it was 20-ish months ago. Syria, the Assad regime has fallen. Hamas and Hezbollah in the Palestinian territories in Lebanon have been significantly weakened. Iran was significantly beaten in its two direct confrontations with Israel in 2024. So the axis of resistance is not dead. The Houthis in Yemen, if anything, are stronger than they were 2 years ago. Now they are arguably the most important non-state partner for Iran. But overall, the axis is much weaker. The last point I'd mention very quickly is, before October 2023, there was a lot of movement or attempted movement towards the normalization of relations between Israel and a number of Arab states. We saw the Abraham Accords with the UAE, Morocco, Bahrain, and Sudan, and there were ongoing talks for Saudi Arabia and others to potentially join these accords. These accords are not dead. There are even rumors that Syria could join at some point, the new Syria, as some version of a normalization agreement with Israel. But at the very least, there's been a lot of uncertainty. And now there's even rumors that Saudi Arabia may be negotiating directly with the U.S. a security arrangement that would put aside normalization with Israel, at least until there's stabilization in Gaza.
And that's all for now, but there will be another edition of the Geopolitical Update every Friday. If you want to learn more about the CDA Institute, follow us on social media, visit our website at cdainstitute.ca, or subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates on Canadian defense and international security. This podcast was researched by our research assistants Claire Parsons and Gabrielle Picton. I'm Josh Malm. Until next time.